This is LSAT Prep Test 138, Section 1, Passage 1. This is a humanities passage about Corridos, narrative folk songs from the lower Rio Grande border. It's a low difficulty passage, but that doesn't mean these are free points here. Students lose questions here because everything sounds the same and they stop paying attention to what each detail is actually doing. Now, this is a survey passage. The author isn't arguing for or against anything. They are explaining what corridos are, how they work, and why they matter to border communities. The main point is that corridos follow strict formal conventions, borrowed from older traditions, and those same conventions are what make them a bonding force for the communities that sing them. Now, the most important section is the middle of the passage where the author lays out the formal features. That's where the test is going to pull questions from. So we're going to go through the whole thing here. Now, paragraph 1 is background. Corridos are narrative folk songs. They come from a region split between Mexico and the US. They flourished from about 1836 to the 1930s, and they have roots in 18th century Spanish ballad tradition. You also learn that corridos combine formal features from several different types of folk songs, but they always deal with border subject matter. So you want to hold on to that idea. The form comes from multiple traditions. The content is always local, and so that matters. You want to move at a normal speed through the next section. You get El Corrido de Quiances, the oldest complete surviving corrido. Now, the date here doesn't matter. Just know it's there as a reference point. Then the author says a single important event could inspire many corrido variants, but each version follows the same standard generic elements. Now, the phrase standard generic elements is easy to skip, but it's reinforcing the entire thesis. Even when the stories change, the form stays the same. Now you want to slow down. The passage tells you corridos were sung at social gatherings. And then it says something students glide right past. Corridos didn't just record what happened locally, they relied heavily on familiar language and thematic conventions to affirm the cohesiveness of border communities. That's the author tipping their hand, revealing their position. Corridos aren't just songs, they are cultural glue. The conventions, like the familiar phrases and the shared themes, they're what hold the community together. If you miss that, you're going to pick answers that treat corridos as simple historical records, but they're much more than that. Now, the next section explains the style. The name comes from the Spanish verb correr, meaning to run or to flow, and corridos live up to that name. They tell their stories simply and quickly, with no embellishments. Figures of speech are rare. When metaphors do show up, they use everyday images the audience already knows. So the example about the hero comparing himself to a thunderstorm is not there because it's interesting. It's there to prove that even the figurative language stays conventional and familiar. So don't get pulled into the content of the example. Its function is to back up the point about simplicity. Then the author mentions that this same storm imagery shows up in other corridos too, including Quiances. And that is an important detail here. It tells you the images aren't just simple, they are shared across the tradition, meaning they get recycled. That is another layer of convention. Now, the last section covers the despedida, which is the formal closing verse. And that's where the structure gets very specific. The first and third lines are set, the second and fourth lines vary. The second names the subject, the fourth carries the corridos name or restates the subject. And the rhyming varies depending on what the verse needs. Now, you don't have to memorize the formula here, but you do have to know that the despedida exists as a fixed structural convention. And then the passage does something smart right at the end. It says the despedida is the clearest marker of both the corrido's uniqueness and its connection to the broader Spanish ballad tradition, both of them at once. The closing verse proves the corrido is its own genre, and it proves the corrido descends from something older. And so, if a question asks about the relationship between corridos and the Spanish ballad tradition, that is your anchor. Now, the key move in this passage is the link between convention and community. Everything formal about corridos, the set structures, the recycled imagery, the familiar language, all of that is also what makes them matter socially. The form is not a limitation, it is the whole point. The conventions are how these songs bind people together. Now, the author's stance here, their perspective, is both respectful and also explanatory. They clearly value the tradition, but they're documenting it, not defending it. The main trap here is treating this as a passage about storytelling, but it's really about how they're built and why that structure matters to the people who share the tradition. It's not about what the corridos say. And so if you pick an answer focused on the content of the songs instead of their formal conventions and social function, you're going to get it wrong. Before you hit the questions, check yourself on these three things. First, what is the connection between the corridos' formal conventions and its role in the community? Second, why does the author keep stressing that corrido imagery is familiar and conventional instead of being original? And third, what does the despedida tell us about how corridos relate to the Spanish ballad tradition they came from?